Hello there. Welcome to Paint It Forward. This is another installment of our monthly artist discussion series through Artists Working in Education, or AWE. My name is Brett Henzig. I'm the program director at AWE, and we are at the Washington Park Media Center, who is hosting us and streaming this for all y'all watching. Washington Park Media Center is a hub for media production, strategy, and training, and we are lucky to be joined by Andrea Skyberg today, who is our featured artist slash educator, writer, illustrator, musician, a little bit of everything, right?
Yeah, I guess I dabble.
So I always like to start off, as we had mentioned, with the question, how do you define you? How would you like to be introduced, considering all of the different things that make you?
I guess a creator. That is where I exist, and that's where I feel the most comfortable. And that might be as a creator of curriculum when I'm a teacher. It might be the creator of fiber arts when I'm working in the studio, or creator of music when I'm making music with my band. I'm also a mom, so I'm a creator of life. So that's probably where I'd say I exist the most.
Excellent. I like that. I think a lot of the discussions that we have around creativity are like what fuels that. So, considering all of those different media methods, ways of bringing things into the world, what fuels that for you? Are there different things that inspire for different types of art making? Is it just a general passion and drive? What keeps those fires burning in all those different areas?
That's a great question. I think I'm really big into the idea of having an impact on the world, like not for reputation or like for ego, but more like driving things forward in a positive way. And change is inevitable, but positive change isn't. So I want to make sure that how I'm coming to the table is in the way of a creator instead of a destroyer, somebody that is hoping to bridge, making connections with other people, helping to bring forward new ideas, and in community too. That's a big part of it.
Yeah, I love that. I love that concept. Change is inevitable. I was just having a discussion earlier today about my own coping with change, but that idea that positive change isn't inevitable. So thinking about the different practices that you have and that idea of impact, as an artist, I feel like we all have those things that we keep more to ourselves. I think in your case, as having a child and considering that part of the creative process, those are definitely things that you probably have some more personal connections to than others. But do you feel like any form of your creativity is held most exclusively to yourself or as your own, that kind of sketchbook type creativity that might not get shared?
Like what form it might take when it's just me?
Yeah.
And I'm not thinking outside of the realm of myself.
Yeah.
Well, this is a weird, I would say, like the response for that is kind of strange, because to me, that would mean that it was just me. But when I feel the most alive when I'm creating, at least recently, like in the most recent years, is when I'm with my band and we are jamming, and like somebody starts playing something, and then I can just jump in with some random lyrics that are coming off the top of my head, and I feel kind of like it's like whoosh, and I don't even notice that it's me anymore, if that makes sense. And so I'm with other people. It's not just me alone, but there's something really magical there that happens that, doesn't always happen when I'm in the studio. When I'm in the studio making, it feels a little bit more intentional, and less flowy. Sometimes I get into the flow state there, but it feels like I work from a cognitive position of like thinking, planning, researching before I create. And with music, it's a little less of that, at least some parts of the music. Yeah.
Sure. Excellent. That's the thing I think a lot of people struggle with too, is like, where's that boundary between the art you make for yourself or the art you sell, or do you sell your art because it's so precious, or, how do you share yourself if it's so personal in some degrees? So I always like to know a little bit more about what people kind of hold more to their own, or where they see themselves kind of losing their traditional practice within other practices. And for yourself, you have a lot of those practices. I'm also really curious, creative curriculum. So can you share a little bit more about where you find creativity in that? Because as an organization like AWE that works with artists in preparing them for potential futures in teaching or teaching artistry, that can sometimes be a barrier, a struggle, a challenge, or something that needs a little more training. Where do you find the creativity in that? Or where do you see it connecting or disconnecting from your personal creative practice?
You mean creating curriculums?
Creating
Yeah.
curriculum,
Okay.
yeah.
I love creating curriculums. It's so fun. And I think it's so before I was teaching full time or even working as an artist in resident, like an artist educator, I was a curator at the UWM Union Art Gallery. And so I got to bring forward artists that I loved and collectively show their work in a space where I still had influence in like what maybe the topic was or how the theme was coming together. But I loved coordinating all of those things because I got to bring so many different voices to the table and different visions. And I feel the same with curriculum. So when I'm designing curriculum, that's where I get to share all these people that I love and then have them essentially, hopefully, inspire what people are learning, right? So it's challenging sometimes because I want to make sure that there's representation happening. So there's a lot of different forms of representation and make sure that I'm, thinking ahead and also being aware of like what's going on in my community, what's going on in the world. But the ideas of creating essentially it's curating environments where people get to come in and learn, right? So it's like, how can I best curate that space for learners? So the curriculum itself is almost like a space. It's a headspace maybe, but if that makes sense, yeah, that's how I kind of approach it.
That completely makes sense. And I want to thank you for that because that's going to be incorporated into training in the future, that idea of the headspace. Well, especially for visual thinkers and creatives, it can be hard to really wrap your head around what it means to turn something that potentially is a flow state or that becomes so or comes from such an internal place into something that you're sharing, into something that you're asking other people to come into and kind of understand. But thinking of it like a space, like a room, like an environment is really powerful and really inspiring. So thank you for that.
Oh, yes. I love spaces. Like that's part of, even what I did on my website for a while was I had Tuesday tours. So because I was obsessed with people's like creative spaces. Where do you work and what does that look like? And so I'd interview different artists or illustrators or writers and ask them to share their studio spaces. And it's like I got to sneak peek into like where they created, but that idea of where creation lives is really exciting to me.
I've been wanting to ask, and I may have to pull up an image here of my own. I know I directed you to show me what you'd like to see, but your work gets pretty large.
Yes, it does.
I'm thinking
I want it to go larger. Like it's too small right now. So, but it can get big. Yeah.
And are you referring to the piece? Let's put it up on the screen here. But the sculpture that you brought with today, you said it was on the smaller side.
Yes, this is like a newer piece that I did out of bronze, and it's very small compared to my other pieces, but it's very, very heavy. But I'm like some of my bigger work. I do make big sculptures and I love working big, but I'm ready to move outside where I can get like so big, where people can like climb on what I'm making, like this, if you can think of this as the size of the room we're in right now, like that's where I want to go next. So,
excellent.
Yeah.
That's, as somebody who also works in sculpture, I tend to gravitate more towards smaller scale sculpture, but things that you can kind of lose yourself in, like railroad miniatures and things are really interesting to me. Yeah, like you bring it in. But I think the piece that or the body of work is within your children's books, which is another area of your work. And if we can see some of the images of the titles here, can you talk a little bit more about where this lives in terms of your creative practice? Because illustrations, of course, are inherently visual, but the writing and the conceptualization and the sequence of this, time-based medium is another thing to consider. Where does this fit in? How do you approach projects like these?
So many of these books actually were created in collaboration with students and teachers in the Milwaukee area. So it was kind of the curriculum design too, because I'd go into schools and work with students and have them collaborate and give their ideas, and then somehow work them into the illustrations and writing the integrity. I can't even say the title of my own book. Is one that they helped me write too. And that was an interesting process. But so the process for these and where they live, that was a big chunk of my experience working as an artist educator before I became a full-time teacher. And that really helped me understand like how I could bring together multiple people, but also multiple art forms to represent a bigger concept. So each of these books really is rooted in like the medium is the message kind of thing. Whereas Squircle, I don't know if I even have any big images of Squircle that I gave you, because this was an older project, but students created like 8-foot wide murals out of fabric. And so they learned how to embroidery, and they had pieces in the murals, and those murals stayed at the school. And then part of the book is done with these big colorful images. And then the other pages, like what you see on the cover, was done with me stitching it with free motion embroidery. But the idea of stitch was so important to that book, because essentially this little girl is lost in the woods, and thread guides her back, but also guides her to understand herself more, guides her to her intuition, and listening to her inner voice. So thread seemed like the natural connection there. Whereas like community, when I did that was a project that was done with over 800 students in a school that was, they were two schools that were separate coming together to form a single school. And so what we did is I had them draw images, write down ideas about what it was that this change meant to them. And then from there, we ended up cutting and tearing it all up and then reassembling it. So it was this idea of tearing down something that was, what they understood to be their own, and then merging it with others to make something new. So all of that like process was part of, the process for like understanding, and kind of a therapeutic process, but also it made sense for the story of the book too.
When I was just going to ask too, it seems like that idea of creating spaces, right? So taking something more conceptual, but envisioning it as a space, or taking something that, is a written experience, or a read experience, I should say, or a viewed experience, but actually, I don't want to say pushing, but like guiding people through a physical engagement interaction. Where does that come from for you? Like, have you always been a very like physical person, like three-dimensional person, or is that a little more emergent from other strategies in terms of your making and teaching, I should say too?
I guess when I got to undergrad and I went to Maryland Institute College of Art in Baltimore, and I had come from northern Minnesota. So it was a big change, kind of like a smaller town to a big city.
Sure.
And when I got there, I didn't have a lot of electives my first semester, but I started like gravitating to anything with textiles in it. Okay. And so people were like, you are going to be a fiber artist. And I was like, what's a fiber artist? And then I found my way to the fiber studios, and I'm like, yes, this is where it's at. And so I like naturally just wanted to work in things that had like that tactile quality. And then it became part of the body. So I did a lot of wearable art, and that, was life size, but then I started to get bigger and bigger. So I don't know if I was always like, when I was in high school, I did a lot of, painting and collaging, and I did sculpture too. But I think, I feel like art education set up where a lot of times we don't necessarily expose students to three-dimensional work, and that might be because of the limitations of what the school has for space or for materials. I did have some of that, but it wasn't like as much as two-dimensional. And so I feel like my world was opened up a lot when I got to college, and I got to see all the different ways I could work.
So having said that too, the idea that these discussions are guides for younger artists, whether you're a young person or whether you're new to the arts. If you're having trouble kind of getting into that world of fiber arts, or if it's something you're like, what's fiber arts, right? If this is a new concept to you, what would be some things that you would recommend a person kind of like dip their toes into to get started, or to get that exploration that they might not have access to in other ways?
Well, I would say, like, how are you dressing yourself? Like, fashion is part of fiber arts, like that, like, I don't know. I remember like back in the day when I'd go to thrift stores and I just pile, like all this stuff, like, into a cart and try to like make something cool out of it. And that would be like a wearable thing for myself. But like, moving forward, like, use what you have. The nature, like, the natural world is right outside your door. So like anytime, I remember in a painting class, my first semester of college, they wanted me to paint something realistic, which I hated doing, honestly.
We've
but I
talked
went
about that in these discussions before. Yeah.
but I was like, all right, well, I'm going to bring texture into it. I went outside and I grabbed a bunch of dried leaves and I glued them to the canvas, and then I painted something realistic. So I would say, like, use what you have, like, listen to what moves you, like,
Sure.
and as far as exposing yourself to fiber arts, I think, luckily in Milwaukee, there's a lot that you can go and check out. We have, the bigger institutions like the art museum, and there's fiber arts in there, but there's a lot of places that you can go into. Get like next door at AWE,
Sure.
thinking about like all of the materials that are there that you can work with and play with. I mean, make a sock puppet, right? Like, I don't know if these are helpful, but I think, whatever you can do to use what you have, don't think you have to be knowing what you're doing to experiment. That's part of the fun.
Yeah, well, and even that permission too of allowing yourself to get into something that might not feel as elevated as, fine art with the F and the A capitalized, right?
Yeah.
So I like the idea of sock puppets and elevating that. And that's what I think is really amazing about your work too, though, is that, you're, you teach at the college level, you work with kids of all ages, but it doesn't seem like there's any less integrity, or there's any, I would say, filtering of your core message of, building community, or having that really strong emotional, visceral connection to what it is that you do. So, a bronze sculpture that you make has just as much texture and emotional weight, pun intended, I guess, considering it's bronze, as, the books that you're doing with kids, or the process that you're having them go through. Which brings me to something I was curious about too. When you're thinking about putting together these projects and these curricula for different age ranges, do you find yourself, or I guess, what are those considerations that you have? Maybe, do you find yourself, outside of standards and such, holding back with the things you talk about, or do you find ways to incorporate the same level of exposure to various artists, or heaviness, one might say, of topics with the littles as much as the olders? Because it seems like, talking about building community and your feelings about separating from your former self and community to your new one is just as important, as impactful as some things you may encounter with a college level art curriculum.
Yeah, I mean, developmental level is really important, but that's not to say that, students at various levels can't be exposed to the same artist. I showed the same artist. Like, I remember showing Nick Cave's work to young students, and I still show that his work to college students. Same with Kara Walker. Like, how can you make it more accessible maybe to like a kindergarten student, but they can still appreciate the visuals. They can appreciate certain parts of the message coming out of those pieces of work in a level that makes sense to them. But I had to learn too, like, some of these, concepts, I might not be able to come at it and have them really grab onto it if I didn't really think ahead to say, well, where are they at and what would make sense to them?
And do you find yourself, as the educator, this maybe is an unfair question to ask of you in front of people you might be currently teaching, but do you have a favorite age range to work with? Does that kind of shift over time? Do you find being a parent means that, maybe you gravitate towards one or other age range more than the other at the moment?
I think that's a really great point at the end, because like when I started doing art residencies, my daughter was about 3, I want to say. And then I started working with grade school level kids. And as she got older, then I started working with older students.
Okay.
Eventually, I was teaching full time in the middle school, and I taught her. And then she moved into high school, and I taught her in high school. And then now she's in college. This is my oldest daughter. My youngest daughter just started high school, but now she's in college, and I'm teaching college. So it's just kind of interesting that I've like moved along the line of education with her.
Well, and was that an intentional thing on your part, or do you feel like that was just where your curiosity drove you, or your interests, or your, I don't know, energy, your vibe, I guess?
Yeah, probably. I mean, I was reading picture books to her at the time, so I got really into picture books, like, and I'm still into them, but like I was obsessed with picture books for the time when she was younger. And then now, I mean, like now I'm working on like my husband and I just did a comic, and I've never been into comics, to be honest. Like that was his thing, but like the way that the stories that I wanted to tell, he's like, this could be told through a comic. And I'm like, you're right. And so now I'm thinking about that in a different way. But I do think part of it is just being open to opportunity. I know that when my kids were little, I felt like I had the ability to work as an artist in resident because, well, they were at home and I could have a more flexible schedule doing it that way. And then when they went off to school, I felt like I could take on more full-time work. And then I was just like building up to, and I love where I'm at right now, teaching college. I'm teaching future art educators, which I love, and artists, which I love. So I guess I've loved every stage that I've been in. I like moving through the stages. It's kind of fun too.
Yeah. And what greater impact than to like expand that out through, empowering other people to do those things and have multiple impacts on other young people. That's really awesome. So a big part of what we talk about too is just like, when do you know what's right for you? And you've kind of shared the multitude of things that you've done, the journey, right? But like, were there ever any moments of kind of doubt in terms of what directions you were taking, or kind of regrets in terms of like, oh, I wish I would have taught college art a little earlier, or I wish I would have dug in a little deeper with like the youngers before moving on to the next phase?
Yeah. Oh, I think that there's always some degree of doubt as a human being.
It's one of those unfortunate evolutionary traits we all got.
I think as you get older, you just learn to live with that as being part of your process. And it's not like, oh, I failed as a human being, but instead it's more like, oh, this is part of it. Like I'm going through this stage where I don't totally get it. And I'm in that messy middle, and just trusting the ground will come, make itself visible to you eventually. But I think that idea of like, oh, I wish I would have taught college earlier. I don't know that I would have been as good teaching it earlier. I think that my experiences had really shaped how not only what I teach, but how I teach and how I view education. And now as working in higher ed and seeing what can be done with education, and it's not just that I've learned it through my career path, but it's been working in the community. It's been working for working with organizations that are doing some fabulous work in Milwaukee, like AWE, and thinking about like how does that help students engage right with the learning? Because if you don't have engagement, what are you doing? So I'm like, yes, I would have loved to teach college right out of my graduate program, but I wasn't ready. I needed more experience. And now I feel like it's a better fit. Yeah.
And at this point in your, I'm not going to limit it to career, but in your life, you're exhibiting as an individual artist. You're still working on, illustrative and book projects, right? You're teaching, what piece maybe is missing that you'd like to have back in, or, what choices have you made to kind of like bring all those things into the same cosmos, I guess, like the same kind of soup or whatever that is currently feeding you and your creativity?
This is the biggest challenge I have, is that I love too many things. And I'm so interested in so many different ways of expressing myself and, like being part of the world of expression. So I have a real hard time trying to like structure myself in a way that I can actually move forward in all the different ways of expressing myself. So instead, I've learned, this is another thing where I've learned that this is part of the process, is that right now, what I'm most interested in will like rise to the top, and those other things will be there still, but they might not be things that I'm practicing on the regular. Like I'm still making visual art, but I'm prompted by things like an exhibition's coming up and, oh, I have to make a new piece of art. And so then that'll light a fire under me to get it done. But the things that I like end up sitting in where I'm really like, oh, I want to do that right now for me is music. I'm really having a fun time with music. I'm missing that idea of regret or like what you're missing. I'm missing doing the writing and illustrating. I have all these books that I've written and illustrated, but I haven't actually like finished. So
Okay.
I would love to get back into that, but it's just trying to find the right time.
So speaking of like that studio space for yourself, does that look like a lot of projects sitting around kind of waiting to emerge
Yes.
into completion? What does that
Yeah.
physical space look like for you, and how do you keep all those things kind of lined up and still make room for like a jam session?
Yeah. It's a good question. I think that like a lot, the writing part of the children's books, I mean, I probably have 20 manuscripts, but they're like living on a computer, right? So that's an easy space to have, but then it's easily forgotten too, because if I don't remember that they're there, then they just sit there. But I think the studio space, I'm like a very clean artist. I like to be organized and clean. So those things get pushed away or put away, right? And then they're brought out when I'm ready to work on them, or I'll have something sitting out to remind me to work on it. So physically, that's kind of how I roll.
And do you feel like that is one of the tools that you use to keep that work style successful and moving forward, is that you are keeping a more organized, tidy physical space with your work? Asking as a person who struggles with that, and asking as a person who's worked with a number of different artists over many years, that's not always a trait of a fine artist or of a visual artist.
I know, because my daughter's also a fine artist and she's not like me at all. But and I think my husband is also an artist, and he keeps a messier space than I'm used to. But like for me, my mind can get so messy if I don't have a space that's organized, then it's too many things, right? Like I need some type of organization. And so visually for me, if the space is organized, then it can let my mind get a little bit chaotic. Yeah. And let me break. And I do get very messy when I'm actually in the process of making, but then I like to like clean up and then come back to the space. And I remember when I was attending a lot of things as a children's writer and illustrator, Eliza Wheeler, she's an illustrator who I loved, and she did a workshop, and she said, if you like when you get blocked or you don't know where to go next, she goes, always end your day or your studio practice knowing what you're going to do the next day. So leave something out that you can finish easily, because it'll help you. That idea of, action helps with motivation. It's not motivation then action, it's action first. So that's been a really great piece of advice that I carry forward.
I think that's the most concisely I've ever heard that stated, that, action leads to motivation, not motivation to action. So thank you for that one as well.
I don't think that I invented that. But
I mean, it
I'll
works
take
though. It's like 2 or 3 words. It's
Yeah.
much easier than don't wait for inspiration to strike, make inspiration happen. It'll fit on a shirt. Speaking of space, I do have to ask, getting back to that like large scale and how it happens, Snicky Fritz. Am I pronouncing that?
You are.
Okay. I was glad to hear you struggle with some of the other titles, because I was worried about Snicky Fritz. There is a shot of you, and this might be a little harder to see. I was familiar with the book. I did not realize how large the figures were.
Yes.
And it feels like this maybe could have been executed in a smaller format. I could be wrong though, but could you talk a little bit more about how that came into being and what that was like as an artist navigating like something that figuratively and literally is such a huge project? Could you share a little bit more about that?
Sure.
It seemed like you were living with these guys for a while.
I was. They were like part of our family. Papa Pumpernickel, Piper, and Penelope, and Pepper. She's not in the picture there, but yeah. They were, so this is when my daughter was about 3 years old, my oldest daughter. And so like the smallest character was bigger than she was, which was really fun. So this word Snicky Fritz came from my grandpa. When I was growing up, he'd always say, "Did you find your Snicky Fritz?" And I was like, "What is that?" And he never would tell me. So eventually I wrote a story about it in the Snicky Fritz. Spoiler alert, is your imagination. But I really wanted this book tied to my grandpa. And my grandpa was a wood carver. So he carved all these figures that looked a lot like the Snicky Fritz characters. And I knew I could not carve the wood like he would. And I also did not want to make miniatures because I work big. And I thought that'd actually be more work to make miniatures, like the whole house and stuff. So I thought, how could I make like my house be part of the illustrations? So, and because I like to decorate and I like to make spaces, I decided I'll make the dolls actually really big, and I'll make them look like they're made out of wood to some degree, which I use masking tape to do. So they do have kind of like a wood-like quality to them, but they're really light, and I could position them in different places around my house to make the illustrations. So that's kind of where that whole book came from. Yeah.
I just love how that completely inverts what most people might think of as common sense. Like, oh, it'll be easier to work small. Like, no, like maybe for some of us, it's easier to work large. But what I like that too, though, is it really opens up those possibilities, though, for other things that might not be possible. So with some of the other pieces, with the collaborative work with children, right? A younger child tactily might not be able to work on a teeny tiny scale and still have it be legible or still find much success with it. So, for some of those collaborative pieces, it did seem to make a little more sense to work large. But it feels like that kind of equipped you with those tools to be able to work on any scale, like jumping in and taking on that challenge of working larger isn't as scary as maybe some people might think, or you might want to embrace or invert your thought process when approaching it. That's brilliant. Because again, when I looked and thought about that, I'm like, well, they're reproduced in a book format. You could work small, but let's work big. Are those figures still around? What do you do with all these large things that you make? Another question a lot of artists have is, I made the thing, now what? Yeah. Where did these live?
They did live for a while in my house.
Okay.
But when we moved, they had to make their way to a place that was no longer part of this world.
Okay. And how are you coping with that?
I was ready. I was like, you're ready to graduate. I don't know. Cause that's part of the problem of making big work is finding a space for it. Like a lot of the work, I don't know if I have some of the pieces from, like if you scroll down, I wonder if there's anything, maybe I didn't put those in. No, I don't think I have, but I did like, after graduate school, like during graduate school and after graduate school, I worked really big, and I had these big forms that I didn't know what to do with. And so a lot of times I just throw them away, like I didn't have the space to keep having them. And that became part of the process too. It was like, they are temporary, like not, my work isn't always like, I'm happy to sell it if people want to buy it, but it really isn't like the kind of work that people usually buy. It's more to, like an installation kind of feel. It is like parts of a bigger whole. And after they've had their time in the spotlight, they usually make their way out.
Well, and it seems to me too, just in hearing you talk about the process and even the process that you work into your curricula for young people or anyone really, when participating in co-making with you, it seems to be a lot about the physical engagement and the interaction with the piece. So do you have any media or any processes that you just are not interested in, or that you've tried and you don't gravitate to because it doesn't have that same physicality to it? Is that a key to your work? And does that help guide what you choose to use or not use at all?
Yeah, I do think like I have a hard time with digital art. And I want to be better at it, to be honest, but it's because I use it for final edits. Like with the books, I'll photograph the work and then it will go into the book. And like with Community and stuff, it needed digital edits. And I don't use digital media enough to remember how to do it every time I need it. So I'd have to reteach myself and then I'd forget it. And so I wish that that was a little quicker for me, but I wouldn't probably use that with students in a bigger project because of the fact that I feel like it doesn't have that tactile quality. But I definitely feel the use of it, especially when I do throw away things after a while. Documenting is really important. Documenting through video or documenting through photography or in book form, like having that as an artifact for what was done in the the experience that was had while making it.
And that seems to be worked in through the collaborations, like with your husband, who I don't know if it was on your website or in your slideshow, had some images of him photographing some of the pieces, and
Yep.
it almost became a bit of a theatrical performance with you like moving some of the pieces or engaging with
Yep.
it. So
yeah, I think this one up here in the corner there, that was the Shimmerling book. And yes, I'm very lucky because my husband is very, very good at digital media. And he helps a lot, and he really shows me what I need to do. So when I need those little lessons on how to like move forward, he's there. But he did a lot of probably all of the photography for Snicky Fritz and Community and Shimmerling. So this one where you can see in the top right is a large character that was made. All the feathers on it were made individually by students. And then, yes, I was like a puppet master. I was the one that was holding those in place while he photographed them.
Which seems very fitting too. That physical engagement doesn't stop after the object is created, but it kind of lives through the process of documenting it, turning into that time-based piece. I love that approach. What about some of your individual studio work? So I'd like to scroll through and look at some of your two-dimensional work. I believe this is, I'm sorry, I have the presenter notes up. I didn't realize that was going to show. But with like more of your two-dimensional work, you've talked a lot about the sculptural work, a lot about the book work that starts as more three-dimensional. What's your relationship with two-dimensional?
So I did do some screen printing the last couple of years, and that's led into working. So like this is kind of two-dimensional, but I will say that there's still dimension to it, and that like it's stuffed inside of it. So there's like when you see it in person, it does pop off the wall. Because I just can't get away from having some dimension in my work.
Sculptors got to sculpt, right?
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I think that I do love screen printing, and I love the art of like creating the imagery, which I did digitally for some of this stuff. And then I would bring it in and do a screen prints of it. But I always seem to like bring it into the realm of like fiber somehow, like whether it's screen printed, not just on paper, but on fabric, or I'm like there's seeds that are part of this. So they're like, woven into the fabric. I use plastic bags a lot, so there might be like more texture and dimension with the plastic bags.
So I like that permission that you give yourself and others to kind of like push those boundaries or subvert kind of the expectation of like, let's do it this way. Or if I'm going to be stuck doing something more 2D, like I can still make it pop. I can still get that fiber arts involved in the process. Out of all your artwork, out of all the things that you've created, whether it's with others or in book format or comic book or music, what are you most proud of that you've made?
My kids.
I was just going to say, okay, sorry. I was just going to say, excluding the children.
Okay.
You've got to say that. And I get that.
Yeah. As far as the other stuff, let's see.
And it can be present really in the slideshow or not.
Okay. It's a really hard question. I don't know. I don't know. I feel like the work is, it's an experience. So I guess I'm proud of the process. I don't know that I'm proud of a piece. I'm proud of the process. I like that I've been part of building with other people a lot of times. And I'm proud that I'm figuring it out and I haven't given up.
That's beautiful. That's very heartwarming. I think that speaks, or as somebody who educates as well, I feel like that's a really hard lesson to teach, and you almost have to let people find that on their own. That just because the thing gets broken halfway through the process and you don't have the final product, just because it doesn't turn out maybe the way you envisioned it in your head, you can still be proud of what you've done. Yeah. Which is really powerful. So thanks for sharing that tidbit too. Looking through all of your work and looking through just the full scope and the breadth of what you've done, do you feel like there's a natural next step for yourself in terms of your making in your career, or even your life? Are you gonna quit making art and join a band and start touring or something like that? Do you feel like that's a path that you can see a next step for? Do you have a 5-year plan? Like what does that look like for you in your life and your making?
I don't have a 5-year plan. I think my plan is that I want to live as much as I can in the moment and make connections with people and things that move me, and then move on when things aren't working, and be okay letting things fall, down if they need to. But I do have goals. I mean, I definitely want to keep making. So I'm like really excited about making things that are really big. I keep making that as a goal for myself, and then I haven't actually made anything as big as I want to yet. So it's living out there, waiting for me. I do also want to keep learning, so like I want to get better at learning a musical instrument. Like I sing mostly, but I'm really slowly trying to learn banjolele and guitar, and I feel like I have a hard time making the time for those things.
Sure.
And so I'd like to, like, as I see myself as I get older and having more time, I really want to focus on learning new things like that. Yeah, I'm pushing myself with different media too.
What type of media? That's an interesting. So banjolele is a banjo ukulele hybrid. I'm
Yeah,
guessing?
that's right.
What type of media then, other than that, do you
Yeah.
want to work yourself into?
Well, like this bronze sculpture, I did that through my ed as a continuing ed student last winter with Will Pergel, and it was the best class. I'm going to make a plug for that. We had a lot of fun, and I learned how to do casting, and it's really exciting when I can like take my ideas and move them into a different medium. So I'm thinking about how I could maybe move into live plants within the bigger sculptures of my work, which is called mosaic cultures. And I love the idea of, building something that can live outside of my own children, right? So like how would that work? So I'm like excited about figuring that out. But yeah, I don't know, just whatever kind of moves me at the time when I see an opportunity to come up, I usually, go toward that.
What lets you trust those opportunities? Like, when do you have like a bit of an internal kind of vibe check that says this is a good fit, this is a right? Is it a little more of a logical evaluation of, is this going to progress my career? Is this going to progress my opportunity if I, try this in this circumstance? Or is it a little more by chance, maybe even?
I think it's it when it's tied to the art. For
Mhm.
me, it's motivated by concept. So like the ideas that I'm working in with this series really are rooted in the idea of valuing the creator versus the destroyer. And so I look a lot at the public art and the statues that we have that are made out of bronze. And I am curious about, well, what message is this sending, and where is the story rooted in these sculptures? And do we show enough of the creator in our public art spaces? Do we show enough of the creator in what we're valuing in our language, or in our ways that we give reverence to, to people or places? And so this series that I'm working on, if you notice, it has a lot of language that's tied to more of war and destruction, but the actual images are of the creator and of creation, and the materials that are part of it are really intentional in that they're made to carry on and carry forward the resilience and the resistance, and then the joy also in the rebirth and the creation.
So in terms of the materials then, when you're working with something like this piece, which seemed to be an outlier in the rest of the bodies of work, what's it like for you engaging with like the plastic army people versus a softer living or formerly living material like plant materials or fibers, for instance? Do you yourself have a visceral reaction to the two? Does that guide the process? Or, is that vision of what the final piece will look like allow you to kind of work through them in the same kind of fashion, like regardless of the material?
No, I do think the material makes a difference, and like this was difficult for me, even though I really liked it. I loved the process, but it also was such a process. And I mean, I think it was 6 weeks before, like from from start to finish, of once a day every week. This was probably one of my first explorations into the idea and the concepts that I was working with. So I did move away from it. So it's right that you noticed it as an outlier. Like, I think that the ideas were connected, and the idea of the army man and toys were a big part of this, and the idea of seeds within the form, but it also was too removed maybe from, or it was too rooted in the other side that I'm trying to point away from. So what I decided to do is use the language. And I think language is really interesting. I love living in the worlds of, as a writer and also an artist, but sometimes language can be a divider, and it can be what roots us in the patriarchy. And creative visuals can be different. We can think of that in a different way. So I guess I play with that a little bit of, naming my pieces in a language that really roots itself in that kind of patriarchy, and then moving forward to a creation vibe in the actual art itself. So this one is part of the work, but it is like, it's probably the question mark, or it's like the start of something. Whereas I didn't really travel on that path as much as I have on some of the other stuff.
Still an important piece though to you.
I think so, because it got me thinking. And, like I worked in a lot of different things with these army men. Like, I started melting them and making bigger goddess sculptures out of them where you couldn't see them as clearly, but still it was like it didn't feel right, and it's not the plastic, because I love plastic bags. So I'm using like the plastic bags a lot, but it was, definitely felt like a little less, like it didn't hit home with me as much.
Yeah, no, I think I really love that, because there's that value that we choose to find in things, regardless of what it ends up becoming, is kind of a bit of a theme of process-based work, or a theme in your work, and that idea of process-based. And I just love that you can identify that, but also still pull from it what you need to move forward from it. I think a lot of times people get discouraged, or don't know how to react to some things that they feel negatively about, especially when it comes from oneself, or trying to make understanding of that. And sometimes it's cathartic, but sometimes it's also more like learning through that experience, learning from that process, or almost like putting it out there to see how you respond to it before moving forward, or with it, or away from it. So then also that idea of the language, but would you call your work in some ways protest work in terms of this body of work?
I don't know. I don't know. I'm not sure. That's a good question. I would say that it is like, I don't want to always be in resistance against something, right? So that's why I hesitate. It's that I want to build a different type of future. Like, I want the imagined future to be more enticing than the protest against what is. So in some ways, yes, it is, because how can I talk about what's happening without, talking about what's happening, but also I want to see beyond it. And I'm hoping that, and I don't know if I've done that yet, but it's like, that's my goal, is to try to have that vision of where, and maybe when these forms are huge and people can like go up to them and like stare in awe at them, maybe then I'll feel like that, or maybe I won't. I don't know. Sure. It might be where I'm like, oh, that wasn't it. I'll have to do something else.
So feel free to tell me that you're not interested in answering this question, because it does get to that personal family life. But with your young people, with your children, at the point that they are in their lives, do you have an idea of what they've done for that, like in terms of you developing the thing, not knowing if it's going to inspire the next generation towards something more enticing? Do you feel like you've set your young people up as parents to embrace that reality, or to be that change that you hope to see and guide other people towards with your work?
So like, are my girls like change makers, kind of? Is that?
Yeah. And are they making that change? Do you feel like you've what are some of those things, those approaches that you've done to help prepare them in the way that maybe you bring your work into the world for that next brighter future that we hopefully it's coming.
Yeah, I mean, I hope so. Fingers crossed. I think, this is the hard thing when you're a parent is, helping your children understand the world as slow as they need to without overwhelming them with all that the world is. And I don't know that I've always done a good job of that because we talk all the time. And when they were little, we talked all the time. And so I try to remember kind of back to that developmental thing with being a teacher and thinking about what makes sense to them. I hope that I did that I hope I did it as best as I could. I'd say I did it as best as I could. But I do think that both of the girls are very thoughtful and aware and empathetic and also determined. And that makes me incredibly happy that they are that they are living their truth out in the world. But I mean, they're humans and just like me, like they're in, like I have a 14-year-old and a 19-year-old. So they're at different places where they're going to struggle. And that's just part of their process. And, knowing that is just going to help them see the world from their perspective even clearer. I think trusting in that a little bit. I don't know if I answered that question, Brett.
I don't know if I asked it in a very good way, but I love the adjectives. I feel like that's, I just love the idea that you're so open to that interpretation of the work, but you're hoping that it does something more, or that it has a greater impact beyond oneself. And it seems to be kind of a thorough line through your creativity, whether it's your own children, your visual art, your teaching, and that idea that, one can feel like they've done a good job preparing the world for the future, I think is a really powerful sentiment. So, and then when you said one of your daughters was involved in the arts, I'm like, okay, so they're doing some good stuff. What's their work like? Do you mind if I ask?
No,
are they fiber artists as well?
Yeah, Evelyn so she goes to MIAD. She's actually in Vancouver right now because she's doing a study abroad program. And she does wearable art and she does animation. So she's into the digital realm that I am not, when she has a lot of Michael's talent in that regard. And she is also a musician. She just released her first album. So cool. She's doing a lot of cool things. And then my younger daughter, Priscilla, is a violinist and she's an artist and she's, first year in high school.
That's a lot of fun. I bet.
Yeah. She's actually, I think she is excited to be out of middle school, but but they're
which is maybe even less fun.
Yeah. They're both like making stuff. And I think that's I love that they both make things.
Yeah. I think that's one of the things we really put at the forefront of what we do with AWE and bringing art to the world is that, it's not so much about making the masterpiece as it is just knowing that you can, or that you have the ability to affect change. And whether that's making something small and bringing it to the world, having a family and bringing that into the world, or taking something small and making it giant into the world, they all have their own value and are an opportunity for impact. So that's a really, really great, refreshing thing to hear shared. So is there anything that you feel like in the idea of making a more positive change, a brighter future, having a greater impact, what do you feel like the city of Milwaukee or the area, the region, the art scene could benefit from? What do we need a little bit more of to make the creative world more X, Y, or Z? More accessible, is it? Or does it need to be more inspiring? Do we need more museums, more galleries, more artists, or less of anything? If you had that ability to wave the wand and make the change, what would it be?
So I'm part of the systems of education, but I would love to see education rooted in art, that you learn through art. Like you can learn everything through art. And I'm not just talking about visual art, but self-expression, self-awareness, understanding empathy, understanding community. So starting with the I and the me, and then moving out to the we. And really, I feel that would change everything. The emphasis being on the creator, that, like you just said, you don't need to make a masterpiece or make anything perfect. It is the act of creating that is important, and remembering that that's who you are. I think that's a big goal of mine as an educator, is to remind people, like, you are made to do this. You are made to make things, like, whether that be cooking something great or planting something, or, dressing funky, like just self-expression, making things and connecting with other people is where it's at. And remember that, because when you were a kid, you wanted that. That's what you wanted to do all the time, but we forget. And I think that, as much as I'm part of education, that system of education is set up to place value on other subjects more than it is on what we consider specials or electives. And those kind of things send a message, loud and clear message, on what's important and what students should pursue. And it trickles into how we live our lives in this world. And so I think if that was changed, it would make a huge, huge difference.
And what, in terms of the way that you educate, what are some of those for other folks looking to share, have impact, educate? Do you have any advice, any tips, any tricks to help with that, to help people see that within themselves, or to help educators help others see that within themselves?
Yeah, I guess the big thing is that you don't have to judge what you're making. Like, you don't have to critique yourself or others on what they're making, that you can experience it and ask questions and be curious about it. But it doesn't have to be a judgment value or a degree of like taste, or like, this is good craft or it's bad. It's like, can the act of making be enough? And if it can, if the answer for you is yes, or if you're an educator right now and the answer for your students is yes, then what does that look like? And how can somebody grow from where they are to where they want to go? Because it's not about competing as much as it is about cooperation, and it's about understanding yourself more. And so if you understand yourself more and you can see where you're at, and it's not to say you don't compete in a sense with yourself, but even the word compete to me like rubs me the wrong way. So I'm like searching for like, what is the other word I could use here? But it's a growth, probably. Like like, how can you see yourself start somewhere and grow somewhere? Because growth is uncomfortable. You're just naturally not in a place where you feel like you know what's going on. And the more that you get used to that feeling of being uncomfortable, the more that you can grow and enjoy the process of the growing.
Yeah, and working towards that, the positive change that's not guaranteed.
Yes, true.
So we are coming to the end of our discussion, and I want to make sure that you're getting everything shared that you want to share. So are there any questions that you wish you would have been asked today that you would like to address or talk about or promote or share?
No, I mean, I think all the questions were really great and I appreciate them. I would just say I teach at Alverno College, and I have to give a shout out to Alverno because I love working at Alverno. This is like all the things that I'm talking about right now are rooted in what Alverno is. At least in my perspective, that is so true. So if any of this resonates with you and you are somebody, or a person that's looking to go into higher ed, please check us out, or reach out to me, because I'd be happy to show you around. I think it's our motto at Alverno is a place where everyone belongs, which I love. And I find that how we allow you to work through that growth, that idea of growth without the idea of competition, instead of self-assessment versus, outside judgment, is so important. So yeah, I just wanted to plug it.
And for those who are unaware of Alverno's kind of ways of, I don't want to say subverting, but like to your point of showing that there's another way, another model that's baked into the standards, the assessments, the entire nature of the institution is built around that.
We are ungraded. So we are rooted in feedback is learning. It's about giving you feedback instead of a letter grade. It's about helping you grow from where you see yourself, where you're starting, into where you want to go. We are also an ability-based school. So in addition to like going into a major, you're also validated in 8 different abilities, which include aesthetic engagement, problem solving, communication, analysis. So, and effective citizenship, that's a big one, developing a global perspective, valuing and your decision making, like where are your values located. So I just think that there's so many rich things about how we teach in where we are within the education system. So
yeah, well, as a former college recruiter myself, I've always told people, and I take this approach to the work we do at AWE, is that there's not things that are necessarily right or wrong or good or bad for somebody. It's a matter of finding your fit, you know, and that could be with one institution, that could be with another. But when you really embrace that embracing of everybody and working with people as individuals versus X, Y, or Z larger groups, you can really do a lot with growth rather than, you know, forcing people into a mold, I guess, that may or may not be a good fit for where they need to be. So thank you for sharing that. This is really heartwarming for me. I think it's like a great, it wasn't intentional, but it was good that it kind of starts off the school year thinking about the individuals, the approach, but also the possibilities of where you can grow and all the things that you can do. So thank you for joining us. And I'm not sure if we have any questions that are coming in that we want addressed, or if there's anything else you'd like to plug. I know you have some things that you've made that you'd like to share possibly, or we have your website up here. Do you want to tell us how we can follow more of what you do?
My website, andreaskyberg.com. And then also we have I need to update the website. It's on my to-do list. But eventually it'll be linked to the comic book that just released in April that my husband, Michael Greer, and I did called SOS. And then let's see, my band is called Bourbon in the Basement, and we are playing, our next gig is Saturday. So we're at bourboninthebasement.com if you want to check us out. And we play like every other week about in the summer, and sometimes we go down to like once a month in the winter. That's when we get to be more creative too. Yeah, and I think that's probably it.
Well, thank you so much, Andrea. I just want to say thank you to AWE for helping make this happen, for Washington Park Media Center, and to the Milwaukee Arts Board for supporting this this work. I feel like we've been getting a really great breadth of people able to join us and speak with us. Hopefully this is finding its audience, and people are valuing the diversity of perspectives and approaches. And if you have any more questions, if you want to engage more with ourselves or any of the artists, please reach out, because we want to be connected. We want to work in community, and we want to be resources to any person out there who's looking to grow, to embrace creativity in their lives, whether it's professionally or whether it's just as a human being. So please connect, reach out. You can find us online. You can find us where you're watching us and streaming, and come out in person. We try to have a lot going on around here. So thanks again, Andrea, and we will hopefully be seeing you all again soon.
Thank you.